Hello, and welcome back to History Explorer, where we go back in time and explore past history events. I'm your host, Mallory Roanoke, and today we have a very special topic for today's cast. On today's episode, we will be explaining the lost colony of Roanoke. Now, I've been to the Outer Banks on multiple occasions, which is where the lost colony of Roanoke was once located. However, this is a super interesting story with a ton of theories and a lot to unpack, so let's get right into it. First, let's start off with a summary on what happened. In 1587, John White, an English artist, sailed with 117 other colonists hoping to start a colony in Roanoke, North Carolina. This was near Chesapeake Bay. When White's colonists had finally settled, he had left to return back to England and bring back more supplies for his colony in 1588. His goal was to return back to them in around 6 to 8 months, but he ended up not returning for another 3 years. The Anglo-Spanish War is what delayed his return, which did not occur until 1590. When he returned, he found the island of Roanoke completely deserted. Strange, right? Well, let's take a look at the clues. The clues that I will share with you today are from a witness statement by John White. I will read this to you now. We found the grass and sundry rotten trees burning around the place. We came to the place where I left my colony in 1586. We saw in the sand footprints of savages' feet of 2 or 3. And as we entered the sandy bank, we saw upon a tree curiously carved the fair Roman letters CRO, which letters presently we know to signify the place where I should find the planters seated, according to the secret token agreed upon between me and them at my last departure from them, which was that in any ways that they should not fail to write or carve on trees or posts or doors of the name of the place they would be seated. For they were always prepared to remove from Roanoke 50 miles into the mainland. End quote. Later on, when him and his rescue crew goes on the island, he wrote, quote, "We went towards the place where we found the colonists, where we left in sundry houses, but we found the houses taken down, and the place very strongly enclosed with a high palisade of great trees, with curtains and flankers, and the chief trees or posts on the right side of the entrance had the bark taken off, and 5 feet from the ground in fair capital letters was graven Croatoan, without any cross or sign of distress. Once seen, we entered the palisade when we found many bars of iron, 2 pegs of lead, 4 iron fowlers, an iron sacker shot, and other heavy things thrown here and there, almost overgrown with grass and weeds. From there, we went on along by the waterside towards the point of creek to see if we could find any of their boats, but we could not see any sign of them, nor any of the last falcons and small ordnance which we had left them in my departure from them. At our return from the creek, some of our sailors meeting us told us that they had found where drivers' chests had been hidden and long since dug up again and broken up, and much of the goods in them spoiled and scattered about, but nothing left of such things the savages knew of undefaced. Presently, Captain Cook and I went to the place which was in the end of the old trench made 2 years by past Captain Amadas, where we found 5 chests that had been carefully hidden of the planters, and of the same chests 3 of were my own. And about the place many of my things spoiled and broken, and my books torn from the covers, the frames of some of my pictures and maps rotten and spoiled with rain, and my armor almost eaten through with rust. But although it grieved me to see the spoil of my goods, yet on the other side I greatly joyed that I had safely found a certain token of their safe being at Croatoan, which is the place where Mentor was born, and the savages of the island are friends." End quote. Alright, there are a couple clues we can take from this statement. Clue 1. When White returned, he had found the cryptic word Croatoan carved into a tree in the palisade on the island. He had also found the letters CRO carved on a fence post. Now these words did in fact have an established meaning in the colony. The year John White left, he made a code with his colonists. If they were to ever leave the island, they would give him a clue to which they traveled to. If the colonists were in danger, they would carve a cross next to the signal. However, when John White returned, there was no cross found. This must have meant that they were not in danger. Croatoan was a nearby island in North Carolina, which is where it was believed that the colonists left to go. Another interesting thing about the island when White returned was the lack of any sort of the colonists at all. There were no houses or anything like that. When John White had left the colonists, he had left them a small ship used for exploring the land. This was also missing. The only thing that the rescue mission were able to find were a few of the heavy items like weapons and chests that had been overgrown by plants, meaning they had been there for a long time. Another time-worthy mention is a man named Mateo. John White believed that the colonists were safe and had found refuge with him. The first expedition that was set in 1684, the colonists had met him. He spoke English as well. John White believed that the colonists had found Mateo again and went to take refuge with him on Croatoan Island. Another clue, which was found much later in 1933, was located after Hurricane Emily had struck the Outer Banks and caused a ton of flooding. This caused around 10 feet of soil to be ripped apart. The storm brought up old artifacts such as pots and pans, lead bullets, nails, bricks, and a gun that dates back to 1583. There were also a few European skeletons found on the island, but they have not been connected back to the skeletal remains of anyone on the Roanoke expedition. Furthermore, more evidence was found in May of 2012. Researchers were looking at John White's maps and found an interesting spot that was discolored on the map. After closer examination, they found out that the spot was a drawing of a fort, which they believe is where the colonists left to. This spot is located 50 miles into the mainland, which in John White's witness statement is where he said they would be. However, researchers have not been able to excavate anything from this area because those are now private lands. Now that we've compiled some evidence, let's move on to some suspected theories. Theory 1. The colonists were taken hostage or killed by the Spanish. This theory revolves around past issues that the Spanish had with the English. The Spanish too had a colony in the New World called St. Augustine, which was 450 miles away from Roanoke. The Spanish soldiers who were living there heard reports that England had established a new colony in the New World as well. At the time, English were at war with the Spanish, and if the Spanish were to have found out where they were located, they would have hunted them down and killed them. The Spanish are also shown to have done this in the past. For instance, in 1562, they had killed off a French attempt to settle in the New World. Over 130 men were killed. This could have been why their ships were missing as well. This was actually a legitimate fear for the colonists. The English often feared that the roaming Spanish ships would spot the colony. However, this theory is not incredibly plausible because there was no signs of struggle and the houses were missing. If the colonists were spotted by the Spanish ships, they would have carved a cross into the tree next to Croatoan. It also wouldn't have made sense for Croatoan to be carved into the tree because this would have had nothing to do with it. It also does not make sense for the Spanish to have taken their houses with them, given that it would be a hassle. Another theory is that the colonists tried to leave on their own and were lost at sea. This theory is based around the idea that John White took longer than expected on his excursion to get more supplies. It is believed that the colonists gave up on waiting for John White to return, so they attempted to sail back to England on their own. The colonists gave up on waiting and figured he wasn't coming back. They would have gotten lost at sea or perished in the process. This could also be why the ship that John White left them was missing. However, this theory doesn't make a ton of sense either, given that there would have been no way that all 115 colonists fit on that one small ship. It also isn't plausible that any of the colonists were left behind, given that there were not many bodies found. It was also thought to believe that the colonists had starved to death. This theory was stemmed around the timing that the colony arrived at Roanoke. During the years of 1587 to 1589, there was the driest 3-year spell that the area has had in a long time. Most people underestimate how difficult it would be to survive in a faraway land without adequate supplies or help. This has also happened to other colonies in years past, and they had to resort to eating their own horses, dogs, rats, or even leather from their own boots. But this theory wouldn't make sense either. If the colonists had all starved to death, why were there no bodies found? Another theory about the colony is the idea that the colonists were killed by the Native Americans. In the past, previous expeditions caused conflict between the English and the Native Americans. It is believed that the native people will never forget the violence they endured. There was one body found on the island when John White returned. It was killed with a tomahawk and scalp wounds. And when the body was found, it was actually found in multiple different parts scattered around the island. It is believed that the natives were trying to hide the remains of the body. Based on past events, the natives could be very violent, so it wouldn't be very unlikely that they would try to attack the second group of colonists when John White left for supplies. This theory is not completely inaccurate, given the past relationship with the English and the natives. The natives also would have had 3 years to get rid of the bodies in the houses. However, this theory does not clarify why the colonists would have hid the chests and some of their things. It also does not explain the Croatoan marking. Furthermore, it was also believed that the colonists were killed by a disease. Upon first glance, this theory would have seemed to make sense because the English did bring over many diseases. However, this theory does not make any sense given the rest of the clues found. One of the least likely theories is that the colony was destroyed by a hurricane. Though many hurricanes did happen in the Outer Banks, it would make sense for this case. Hurricanes aren't picky, they would only take houses and people and not fences or trees. Finally, the last theory is that the Roanoke colonists moved to Croatoan Island, which just so happens to be the theory I also believe in. John White himself even believed in this theory. As previously mentioned, the word Croatoan was carved into a tree on the island. This code was established by the colony when John White left. It meant that the settlers had moved to the island of Croatoan. This would explain why there were no bodies found and why they had taken their houses. Even if they didn't end up staying in Croatoan and moved 50 miles into the mainland, it would have made more sense for them to have just left, maybe to find better growing land or just explore the rest of the area. Of course, there will always be people that say that it was the aliens or the supernatural, but tell us what you think in the comments. We'll see you next time on History Explorer.